This week we are digging back into my stash of wood and creating more beautiful winter decor for $0. Stick around and I'll show you how I do it. Hey everyone, welcome to A Handful of Daisies. If you're new here, I'm Elaine. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's project and want to see more, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel and join our DIY family. If you're already subscribed, thanks so much for being a part of our family. I hope you're finding inspiration in our projects and maybe trying some on your own. This week, we're continuing to use wood I have laying around my house to make some skinny wood snowmen. So let's get right into this week's project. I started out by creating a stencil using some foam board I had in my craft room, so all the snowmen would be about the same size. I used a picture I saw on Pinterest and then I just drew it out as close as I could to match it. The stencil is about 36 inches tall. Once I had the stencil cut out, I headed out to the garage and set up my table. Then I pulled out a piece of my plywood. The plywood was about 3/4 inch thick. I wanted them to be fairly thick so they would stand up straight without bowing. I used my jigsaw to cut out the shapes. I cut out a total of 5. I realized after I finished cutting them that, of course, my camera battery died and I didn't know it, so I didn't get the video of cutting it out. If you want to see how I use my jigsaw to cut out wood shapes, you can go back and watch my video from last week where I created wood Christmas trees. I'll link that below. Once they were all cut out, I used my orbital sander and some 220 grit sandpaper to smooth them out, and then I rounded out the edges a little as well. Here's what they look like once they were sanded. I used a microfiber cloth to clean off all the sanding dust, and then I took them back inside my craft room to paint them. For my base coat, I'm using Waverly chalk paint in white. The wood does absorb the paint, so it did take 2 coats to get full coverage. I did paint the front, the sides, and the back. I'm also using my Lazy Susan, so it does make it a lot easier to move it around to get the sides as well without having to touch it and mess up the wet paint. I have 3 or 4 different Lazy Susans and I use them on most of my projects. If you're a crafter and you don't have one, it's definitely something that everyone should have in their craft room. Once the white paint dried, I'm going to use Waverly chalk paint and ink, which is a really dark black, to paint the hat. Again, I'm going to paint the front, the sides, and the back. Since I can't paint a straight line, I'm using some masking tape across the bottom of the hat. The Waverly ink paint is very pigmented and it only took one coat. The great thing about Waverly paint is it dries really fast. But since I had this on my Lazy Susan, I was able to turn it over and paint the backside of the hat without it drying completely. Once it was completely dried, I went ahead and pulled off the masking tape. And then I taped off just above the brim of the hat on both sides to add a red stripe. I used Waverly paint in crimson for the stripe. Now you can use other embellishments on the hat, but I decided just to use paint. The red did take 2 coats to cover over the black. This time I did use my hairdryer to dry the paint a little faster. Since there was 2 coats, it did take a little bit longer. Once it was dried, I pulled off the tape. Now we're ready for the face. I knew I wouldn't be able to draw the faces that I wanted, so I used my silhouette machine to cut out a stencil using some cardstock and free printable faces that I found online. I wanted to use different faces on each snowman, but I only cut out 4, and I have 5 snowmen, so 2 of them will have the same face. I cut the stencils apart so it would be a little bit easier to hold in place, and I used a Dollar Tree stencil brush and the Waverly black paint again to paint the faces on. So I just put some paint on my brush and then I offloaded it onto my rag because I didn't want a lot of paint on my brush so it wouldn't go under the stencil. And I didn't paint in the nose. I will go back and paint that last. So I just moved on to the next snowman and stencil until all 5 were done. I wanted to make sure that the faces were completely dry before I put the stencils back on to do the nose. The only orange paint I had was this apple barrel acrylic paint, so that's what I used. I did the same process on the nose using a stencil brush and just a little paint on it. I think they're looking pretty good so far. What do you think? Well, you can't have a snowman without a scarf. So I looked through my craft room to see what I had to make their scarves. I was determined to use only what I had on hand for this project. So I did find a red fleece throw blanket. I think I had it from last Christmas. I may have paid $2 or $3 for it. It was a pretty cheap blanket. And this is going to work perfect. But before I put the scarves on, I do need to add a base to them. I had pre-cut some of the plywood down to about 6 inches by 8 inches, and I painted them with the same black Waverly paint. I actually measured this time to make sure I put them in the center. Normally, I just eyeball it. I used my drill and I pre-drilled holes in the base where my screws were going. That way I can make sure that I'm not going to split my wood when I put the screws in. Then I went ahead and screwed all the bases on to all 5 of the snowmen. Once those were done, I did take them all outside and sprayed them with about 2 or 3 coats of polyacrylic just to seal in the paint. Now for the final step, we're going to add the scarf. So I just cut some strips about 12 inches long for each one, and then I tied them around the neck. This material does stretch, so when I pulled it around the neck and tied it really tight, it did stretch it out a little bit, which made it the perfect length. So here's a look at how they turned out. Let me know in the comments below what you think of my skinny snowmen. Thank you for crafting with me today. If you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and share this video with someone else you think that might find it helpful. I have so many winter and Christmas projects planned, so don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next project. And I'll see you in the next one.